very much for coming. I'm Robert Dejari from Temple University, Japan. Just a few points. If you have a mobile phone, just put it on vibrate or silent. We're extremely happy to have Marshall, who's a very long and distinguished history of teaching and studying in Japan. He is the author of Towards a Bilingual Japan. Here it is, if someone can show the book. Here's the book. And he will talk to us about the plight of English education in Japan. He will speak to us in English, since the Temple is an English-speaking institution. And without further ado, I'll give the floor to Marshall. Thank you very much.
Yeah, actually, I don't speak, much less write Japanese, nearly well enough to write a book. So I wrote this in English.
Maybe you want to use the mic in the back so they can hear you in the back.
So the translator of the book is Kyoko Nakazato, who is sitting here. Where did she go? Oh, there she is. Okay. Back in the back of the room. I'm told that the translation is eloquent, perhaps even in a way that the original was not. I should make excuses about the title of the lecture tonight. The plight of English education in Japan. When I wrote that word plight, I thought to myself, it must be familiar to everybody, but I'm not sure that's the case. So I looked it up in the dictionary, and the dictionary said plight is a situation, especially an unfortunate or unhappy situation. So it is the unfortunate or unhappy situation of English in Japan that I wish to discuss tonight. Let's see if I can arrange this. Okay, and if I want to stand up, I can do it like this, and if I want to sit down, I can sit down. Great. Okay. The problem I would like to discuss is that English education in Japan is asked to serve two masters, and it serves only the first one well. The first master is the gatekeeper function of universities. Gatekeeper is a sociological term referring to the people who bar your entry to some place where you want to be. So the entrance tests are gatekeepers for universities. I think the present state of English in Japan serves that first master very well. The second master is Momukagakusho, which has a government policy of promoting Japanese who can speak English. And the state of English education in Japan does not serve that second master very well. It does not produce by any satisfactory measure Japanese who can speak English. So this lecture will discuss reasons for the present situation and realistic expectations for the future. I am not able to offer a panacea for any price, but there are some things that I think will gradually win the understanding of the public, and over the course of the next century or so, at least, it changed the situation of English education in Japan. How did we get into this situation? English education in Japan was really quite successful for the first quarter century after Commodore Perry's visits in 1850s. English was widely taught, and it was used in educational institutions. When Tokyo University began to coalesce in 1868, English was the most frequent language of instruction, and that many of the lecturers were, in fact, English speakers, either as a first or second language. And that went on until after 1880. You remember that the Meiji era began in 1868. And during the first part of the Meiji era, there was an enthusiasm, a rage for foreign things, for Western things, European things, and for English as well as French and German and Italian. English was the language of instruction in many schools, but then the conservative reaction began. The conservative reaction was, of course, against over-Westernization, against selling out traditional, valuable Japanese culture to some foreign cultures. But that's getting ahead of the story a little bit. Let me mention some examples of English success. You remember Kurosawa Yukichi, the founder of Keio University. He ran an English school at first, and he was an essayist in Japanese as well as English. Really very good at what he did. There was a Japanese patriot by the name of Tokutomi Soho. He started his professional life as a school teacher, and he had quite a heavy load that he laid on his students in Japanese and in Chinese and in English. In the English side, I copied down some of the titles that he was giving his students. These are full-strength English texts. Macaulay's History of England, Gray's Elements of Botany, Guyot's Physical Geography. I'm going to talk about geography a little bit later. And Herbert Spencer's Social Statics, which, I'm sorry to say, Tokutomi believed rather too much, at least at first. Then there is Nitobe Inazo, who wrote Bushido originally in English. And in case you haven't looked at Bushido recently, I'll read you the first few lines of it. Chivalry is a flower no less indigenous to the soil of Japan than its emblem, the cherry blossom. Nor is it a dried-up specimen of antique virtue preserved in the herbarium of our history. It is still a living object of power and beauty among us, and if it assumes no tangible shape or form, it nonetheless scents the moral atmosphere and makes us aware that we're still under its potent spell. I'll read you one more sentence. The next sentence is, I warn you, a compound sentence with 3 subordinate clauses and an extra verbal phrase. The conditions of society which brought it forth and nourished it have long disappeared. But as those far-off stars which once were and are not still continue to shed their rays upon us, so the light of chivalry, which was a child of feudalism, still illuminates our moral path, surviving its mother institution. That guy could write. I don't care where he was born. That was really a marvelous kind of performance. But really, the top guys in Japan, the students who were born in the years around 1840 to 1860, aspired to a really high level of English and achieved it. That proves to me that it's possible, which is maybe an uphill argument. But all of this early training, the early success in English began to fade in 1882 when the reaction against foreign things changed the rules at Tokyo University. Use of English in lectures at Tokyo University was forbidden, and the standard language of a lecturer was Japanese. So you might think that was the end of the strong influence of English in Japan. It was the end, after all, for French and German and other languages that had come to be studied only by specialists. But no, English survived in a sense, in a crippled state. They forgot one thing. They forgot to ban English from entrance examinations. So there we are, starting 130 years ago, with a gradual divergence of English for entrance examinations and English as it is really spoken by real people. That separation, that circumstance of the estrangement of entrance exam English from English as it is used to move people's hearts and to express profound thoughts, that divergence is responsible for a great deal of what's wrong with English teaching in Japan. So the English that is tested is quite different from English as people speak it. Say English for use. There are 4 aspects of the divergence that I'll talk about. One, the focus on tests has had a washback effect on what was studied. What's easiest to test? Well, of course, abstract sentence patterns, grammar and vocabulary, words often without context, left brain things. The English studying and testing industry has flourished. Textbook publishers, jukus, yobikos, and testers themselves, both academic institutions and private agencies, have found ways of profiting from the mania of English as an object of study, not as a participatory sport, as an object of study. Number 3, the tests themselves have become rarefied as the testing institutions strove further to differentiate each year's test from the last. And for the global testers, such as TOEFL, there's a need to spread out performers on the measurable continuum, so it's had that effect. And the linguistic theories that were advanced, at least since the 1950s, were quite congenial to the notion of grammar in tests. And the theory, you must have heard of it, the theory is that when we speak a language, we use its grammar in order to form a sentence. Have you heard that? Okay. Well, it's not true. We don't. So let me talk about what's wrong with English teaching at present. At the top of the, I couldn't cover all the possibilities, but at the top of the list of what's wrong with English are two things, and they are interrelated. For one thing, grammar. For 99% of people, it's a mistake to think that a language can be learned through its grammar. And I must confess that I don't have much of an understanding of the minds of people who can learn a language through its grammar. One of them is the renowned linguist Bernard Comrie, so they exist. But mostly, speaking a language is a whole brain thing, left brain and right brain. Grammar is a left brain function. It's all about facts and structures and individual words. The right brain specializes in understanding meaning, situation, and nuance. Things like tone of voice to hear and to produce. So if you learn a language only by learning its left brain aspects, you're left with an empty feeling. You feel that you're helpless when faced with a real language situation, because no speaker of a language puts sentences together by rules of grammar. Grammar was invented by clever linguists to explain after the fact whatever regular patterns they could write on paper when they investigated languages. So if you teach a student language only as a left brain function, the student forever feels handicapped. He feels, yes, I have studied this for a long time, but I can't really cope with a real conversation, any real conversation. The second problem with English language teaching at present is in Japan. This is almost unique to Japan. A fear of making mistakes. This is practically an epidemic in Japan. It seems to result from a culture that values perfection, that values the perfecting of skills and the perfecting of knowledge. Many Japanese people are scared speechless of English because they know they can't handle nuances. Let me give you some examples of the, I call it agophobia. My daughter Nami came back from the second grade one day, and she explained to me that English is difficult. And I said, but Nami, we talk English together every day. Nami said, yeah, that's just talking. English is difficult. They had persuaded her of that at school, and of course what they said there was quite different from any feeling that Papa might have. One of the members of the audience, Scott Daughter, Professor Temple, 2 weeks ago, went to buy a rubber ring a replacement ring to put in his coffee maker. So he went to Dean's and DeLuca in Shinagawa and approached the coffee maker counter, and the nice lady there said, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't speak English." But she said it without error. And so he grabbed a coffee maker and tore it apart and showed her the rubber ring that he wanted to buy. And her response to that was, "I'm very sorry, we don't sell that as an individual item." He walked away wondering to himself, where does this woman get off believing that she doesn't speak English? So Professor Daughter asked me my opinion about that, and I said, well, obviously what she meant is she doesn't speak perfect English. And that, and only that, can account for her reluctance, her initial approach to him, by denying that she could do anything with English. Well, I see Masako Van Ester is in the audience. As my student, she did a project of asking getting a questionnaire filled out in Denmark and in Japan. And so, of course, she used Danish and Japanese and English in the questionnaire, the three languages. And the questionnaire was about, how much English do you have at home, and that kind of thing. How much do you use it? So she sent the questionnaire to Denmark, and in due course received the responses from the students there, and sent it to a Japanese school, and got a distress call from the school. The school said, "I'm sorry, we must ask you to take that strange language off the questionnaire." Why? Because it freaks out the students. So I told her to stop the study right there. That was her finding. that agophobia would prevent any sense of communication, any sense of response to a questionnaire. The Daily Yomiuri has started a recent series of feature stories on the language page. Now, you remember that the Daily Yomiuri is an English language newspaper, and runs a page called The Language Connection. And so here on page 1, you get a English teaser for the feature story itself, and on I should hold this up a little higher. And the English teaser says, ex Takarazuka star Yuko Wow explains how a New York fast food outlet played a role in honing her English skills. Language Connection, page 14. So you turn eagerly to Language Connection, page 14, and here's the story. And it's all in Japanese. And I'm trying to figure out, what is the explanation? Well, it is agophobia. They certainly wouldn't want to put the story in English because it would frighten people. But it's a story about celebrities success, a celebrity's particular method of breaking through into English. And I just shake my head at that bullheadedness that makes them feel reluctant to give people the full English experience. Japan is the only country that offers a certain psychiatric diagnosis. You remember that most psychiatric diagnoses are worldwide, like schizophrenia and depression and things like that. One diagnosis is permitted only in Japan. That is Taijin Kyohusho. And it is something like an intense fear that something about yourself, your body, or your language, or something you do, is horribly offensive to other people. It's that kind of horrible fear. And I suspect that there's a little bit of that in the Japanese reluctance to speak English. There is a sense that maybe if I speak English wrong, I will offend people's ears. Strange notion, but there it is. So these two major problems, the concentration on grammar, which of course no one can ever get right, and the agophobia, have led to some bizarre consequences. And we're only beginning to understand now the explanation for some of these consequences. Professor Toshiaki Ozasa of Fukuyama Heisei University in Hiroshima is president of the Japan Society for the Study of the History of English Teaching. And so he reported at a conference 3 years ago that he'd studied English textbooks used in Japan over the last 130 years, from the Meiji era to the present. And he found originally a very large number of words in textbooks, as many as 130,000, all of them in the several tens of thousands, as well as total freedom of the authors to use whatever grammatical forms seemed most expressive. That was in the early days. But at the present, the total number of words in first-year textbooks is about 1,500. The total number of words, including repeated words. And in the beginning, although all grammatical forms were presented wherever they were appropriate, now in Japan there is perfect control over the graduated sequence of grammatical forms, so that no form is presented before its time. So, and Professor Ozasa gave the example, I was sleeping. So I guess that's what would you say, a past continuous? Now that's not taught in junior high school. So you can't use that in high school entrance exams. You can't use a past continuous form. That seems a bit odd, because sometimes when you want to use a form like that in order to express an idea. And Professor Ozasa said with some pride that only Japan, among all Southeast Asian nations, only Japan keeps perfect control over the formal introduction of a sequence of grammatical forms throughout the secondary school years. Yay! All other Southeast Asian countries slip once in a while. Places like Taiwan seem to have a remarkably lax policy toward keeping out untaught grammatical forms. And so Professor Ozasa said that the simplification doesn't seem to have worked. The 130-year effort has been to make studying English palatable, sugar-coated, with shorter textbooks and control of grammar. But Ozasa concluded that such efforts have produced textbooks that are unnatural and difficult to read, if they convey any sense at all. And he wrote, there's the harsh reality that many of our students find it difficult to catch up even with these textbooks. In light of this, Professor Ozasa said, somebody has to talk about the elephant in the room. What is the elephant in the room? It is that the language is learned not by simplifying it, but by complexifying it, by giving it in all of its richness and expressiveness so that the hearer can participate in the meaning, both the meaning of individual sentences and the long meaning of the story of paragraphs and of groups of paragraphs. And much of the study doesn't involve actual use of English, actual conversation or practice of English. So let me use the metaphor of a driving school. If driving schools followed the design of English curriculum, they would teach students entirely within the walls of the schools. Students wouldn't be allowed to drive in the real world. Instead, they would take many classes on how cars work, including all the principles of internal combustion engines, valves and carburetors, the mechanics of drivetrains, steering mechanisms, gears, braking, rules of the road, etc. Testing would be severe. But no graduate could actually drive a car, much less drive with the skill we assume from safe drivers everywhere. That's an analogy that was suggested to me by one of my students, and I must report that I'm extraordinarily lucky to be blessed with students who teach me. It's the best way. So it's a fact that learning about English is not enough, just as learning about motor cars is not enough. You got to be doing it. And many junior high school students who enter junior high say to themselves, "Oh boy, I'm gonna learn to get into the new world of English and talk to new people a new way." They soon learn that nothing of the sort will happen. They will not be expected to use English, but only to learn about it as a series of facts to be stored in the left brain. The situation has come about not because of evil intent by policymakers, not by any dark conspiracy to deny students access to a foreign language. Actually, there's some controversy about whether there is a dark conspiracy to deny English to Japanese people. I once wrote a newspaper column called Japanese Sakoku Defense Against English, in which I suggested that just as Japan had successfully maintained a sakoku policy of keeping the foreigners out physically, so when it was no longer possible, it took place mentally. And so the Japanese people only pretended to teach English, but set it up so that it would never take. Beginning with starting teaching it only in junior high school, and all of the sins of grammar and all of the things we know don't work for teaching language. So I explained in the column that I was just using that as a dark threat. I didn't really believe it. But I got email from a number of readers, and the foreigners who had been in Japan for 25 years or more said, "You were right. I know for a fact that you are right. I know how this stuff works. You're right. It's an unspoken conspiracy to keep English away from Japanese people." And I still don't believe that, but I worry about it. It has come about, I think, not from deliberate conspiracy, but from ignorance about how languages are learned. My discussion of right brain and left brain is, after all, fairly recent, fairly radical. My rejection of grammar is, I can't say recent, but it is not mainstream. And yet, we have to believe that language is learned not by the methods that have been considered traditional, but by new methods that use both sides of the brain. So the fault lies in well-meaning presentation of what is thought of as an odd body of knowledge. Body of knowledge? A language? Yes, it is to be memorized as a body of knowledge. That's the way we teach it and test it. So let me come to item 4 on the agenda. Getting time for me to think of winding up. What can be done about the unfortunate condition of English education in Japan? One given of the situation is we can't eliminate entrance tests. Now, one hears calls from time to time to eliminate entrance tests, the big evil or entrance test. But that's part of the whole gatekeeper system by which Japanese people, and especially Japanese mothers, live, and they would be lost, completely lost without it. So there will be entrance tests, there will be knowledge to be tested, and the system of barriers will remain in place in one form or another, at least in the short term. So, although entrance tests have nothing in common with the Monbuka Gakusho's goal of Japanese who can speak English, entrance tests have metastasized like a cancer spreading so widely that they simply cannot be cut away. They're part of Japanese culture, part of more than culture, part of the Japanese socioeconomic situation, part of the determination of a student's life chances. So we can't consider eliminating them. But maybe there are alternatives to testing English. Now that we know what English is, and that is not a set of facts to be memorized, not a science, nothing that has precise answers really, but instead nuances, poetic suggestions, persuasive ability, expressive ability. Now that we know that, maybe we should find an alternative to English language testing for entrance exams. I suggested in my book that it might be useful to consider what would be the effect of using some other discipline. For instance, instead of English, how about geography? Geography would serve the gatekeeping function much better than English, because geography doesn't contain concepts that are difficult for entrance exam committees to write. Geography is based on factual material that can be memorized. There's really a lot of it. But always in language, there's an element of style. And that contributes to the unfairness of entrance exams. Geography wouldn't terrorize teachers. Now, many Japanese people who teach English are scared to death that their pronunciation isn't good enough, or their skill isn't good enough, or their conversational ability isn't good enough. And that kind of fear, the agophobia on the part of teachers, would go away if they were teaching geography, teaching to tests in geography. And the last argument for a subject like geography is it would leave students with knowledge that is of lasting value to them. And many students graduate from their educational career and almost never use English in a formal way again. But geography, well, that's kind of a contribution to being a good citizen. Having a good understanding of geography might even lead to a different attitude, not so much a xenophobic attitude, a fear of foreign things, but instead of embracing foreign things as students learn geography of places outside Japan. So there are some arguments for experimenting with alternatives to English. There's a perfectly good geography test on the center Nyoshi, the center test given in mid-January. And so if Tokyo University were to require geography and make English an elective subject, it would have an instant effect all the way back down, and it might be a beneficial effect. So there's a question. The ministry is rather hoping that Japanese secondary school teachers will teach English through speaking English. And that's got a number of English teachers terrified because they don't feel capable of teaching in English. Part of it is their fear of being judged, their fear of making mistakes. And students are really quite unforgiving about teachers who are not perfect. But that fear is maybe the greatest epidemic disease that affects teachers. And students sense their teachers' moods. They don't need to be told how the teacher feels. They just need to see the teacher scared half to death by the prospect of speaking English. So the most important thing for teachers to learn to do is to smile at mistakes and keep trying. Bounce back like Daruma dolls. And if students see teachers doing this, they'll soon learn to do it themselves. And that's the way to learn a language. You've got to be trying a number of things. You've got to be making mistakes, but you have to be using it. Also, the Japanese public is changing. There's a natural public interest in speaking English, and this is speaking English as a separate thing, practical English, as apart from entrance tests. And it's still maybe not conceptually separate in many people's minds, but some aspects of the separation of practical English from entrance exam English is the gradual realization, particularly on the part of mothers. Mothers, after all, are alert. Realization by mothers that if they want their kids to learn English, the earlier the better. Don't wait for junior high school, but the earlier the better. And actually the ministry reacted to this general sense by beginning English appreciation classes in elementary school, and on a very small scale at first, but that's going to have a profound effect as students who go from elementary school to junior high schools thinking of English as a means of communicating with people will suddenly find they're not invited to communicate, they're invited to memorize. That's likely to cause a great deal of unhappiness. Now, the English is present in Japanese culture, Japanese society, in our TV sets, in advertisements, and billboards. You need a basic understanding of English just in order to interpret what you see on your TV set. And that didn't used to be, but now you just have to understand some minimal English. They throw it in routinely. And this is changing. I've been in Japan for almost 28 years, and I didn't used to see so much English. But now I'm seeing a whole lot more. And I think that this trend will continue, whether anybody wants to stop it or not. Finally, we must consider as a fact and a potentially useful tool for teaching that in Japanese there are more than 1,000 words from English, the Gairaigo. So, and they're different in Japanese, they're pronounced differently, but the difference is kind of fun if you give it to a student in the proper way. And teach students to give that odd English pronunciations to things. So instead of departo, it's department. Yow. But that's sort of fun. Department, yay, department. So, if approached in the right way, just teaching Japanese people that they already know 1,000 words of English, but they need to be told the pronunciation. They need to make a habit of the pronunciation. It's likely to be very beneficial. So I think that the public will increasingly give pressure to governments to recognize practical English. Some of the non-school or non-public school teaching of English reveal the popular desire. There are conversation schools, eikaiwa, completely unregulated, unnoticed perhaps by Monkasho, but also there are other kinds of groups. There are English circles that citizens spontaneously form in various places in various ways. There are groups of mothers, ego de kosodate groups, who learn to speak English to their babies absolutely from the first day, and gradually increase the pressure. It leads me to wonder, really, is Moncasio really interested in practical English? Is Moncasio really interested in Japanese who can speak English? Because they have the makings of that result, but they're just not using it. They have rather a narrow-minded view that the standard public schools are where you learn English. So Moncasio, like my second grade NAMI, just has a set mind that English is difficult, and that therefore you wouldn't give it to a person in a casual or comfortable kind of way. So let me ask what we can expect for the future. And of course I can't answer this with any confidence or accuracy, but I think we can expect that an enlightened public will have an effect. Not quickly perhaps, but over the course of the next 130 years. And, well, we've seen the last 130, and we're beginning to conceptualize it ever more clearly. During the next years and decades, we can expect greater understanding of the nature of language, the nature of language learning, and the means to pursue that second goal of English education. In the long run, public recognition of the twin masters of academic knowledge and language for use will probably cause a demand for the ability to choose courses of study, the ability to choose whether one wants to study the one or the other, or both, or neither. Those choices are likely to be demanded by the public in the future. Okay, I sense that I have reached the time limit, so let me shut up. And really, I was hoping for discussion in which we have contributions from lots of folks. So let's hear it.
Thank you very much. I think you've raised a lot of questions. The one question I would ask, of course, is, does the system, quote unquote, want English to be improved? Secondly, there's the issue of demand. But I know there are a lot of questions, so since you're an academic, I'll let you take your own question. So speak up or hold your peace forever, and you will circulate the mic. Yeah? Okay, so.
Does the system want English to be improved? And I take it the system here is a faceless, nameless monster of public opinion, and it doesn't like change. On the other hand, it's very uncomfortable with the results of current English instruction. Very uncomfortable. And so if people began to recognize a way out of this terrible self-loathing, and a way out of the feeling of inadequacy in facing English, the system might change slowly. I hope so.
I'll go. Okay. Thanks, Professor. My name is William Neely. You mentioned Monfuka Gakusho and panic-stricken Japanese teachers of English probably in the classroom. So I'm guessing, do you have some knowledge or some thoughts about the JET program, which is now, do you? Okay.
Yes.
Which is now, I think, about close to 25 years since it's been implemented all across Japan. It's under review, I understand, by some Japanese lawmakers and Monbuka Gakusho. So if you were speaking to the panel, Monbuka Gakusho, what would you say to them about the JET program?
I would say that the JET teachers they have now are underutilized. These untrained gaijin who are here only by virtue of the fact that their native language is English, and not by virtue of any understanding of teaching or any proven interest in students. So they're systematically marginalized, even the good ones. And they feel bad about that. It's difficult for Japanese teachers to communicate with them, and it's certainly difficult to communicate the subtleties of the educational situation, and so mostly they get left alone. A few JET teachers can be very effective, can be very useful, and we have some teachers in the room who have been able to use their assistant language teachers, ALTs, very effectively. In fact, Naomi Yoneyama, could you tell us a little bit about your good experiences with ALTs? You teach in a high school, right?
Yes, I have been teaching in Japanese public high school for maybe about 30 years. So I have been working since JET program started about in 1987. So, and actually I worked with many different ALTs, and some of them we could work very well, and some were not. A very good, I remember one of the best LDs. He's from New York, and he was loved by every student. At that time I work in kind of lower level high school, and the students don't like to study anything because they don't speak English at all. But at that time, an LD named Dorothy came from New York, and he was so friendly, and he somehow he got along with our students very well, and I teamed with him, and he actually worked for 3 years in our school. The first year he didn't seem to know much about how to teach, but from the second year suddenly he changed. First year he observed our teaching in school, and he supported my teaching, but the second year he suddenly said, okay, I'll do it, I can do it, and from this year I'll be a leader, a kind of leading teacher, and Yonekawa sensei, you'll be a supporter or something, you'll be an assistant. So from the second year we switched the role. I'll be a kind of language assistant teacher, and he lead a role in teaching. So, and he suggested a lot of activities, or we did a lot of games, and he gave always he gave direction in English. of course, he was a leader, so he gave directions all in English, and okay, let's everybody stand up or something, and let's move your chair, your desks aside or something. Everything he did it in English, and we enjoyed a lot of games, and the students enjoyed very much, and I learned a lot from him. And we did a class magazine project in some class, and at the end of the year, everybody has a class magazine. And anyway, a lot of things we did together, so actually it was very fun for me to teach with him. So he was one of the very good LTs, I think.
So out of 30 years, he was there 3 years.
Mm. He had to go home after 3 years.
That's, I mean, if you look at return on investment, those 3 years were obviously very good in your experience. There's 25 years of that, and you know, say yes or no, you know, that's great that you got that, but I wonder.
I would like him to come back now. And now I teach with a guy from New Zealand. He used to be a PE teacher in London, he said. So a PE teacher in London came to Japan to teach English. So it's very kind of hard for us English teachers to teach with him. We have to teach how to
get in shape.
Yes, that's kind of thing.
So I conclude from this exchange that ALTs can be very effective. They can be very effective in getting the students to speak English. Now this is mostly right brain functions having to do with interpreting the meaning of words. So if Dolga says, all right, everybody stand up, then he does it. Then they figure out, oh, that must be what that means. And you learn a language, I'm not sure if it's 10 times faster or 100 times faster if you learn it through the whole brain, but through learning through doing. So the teachers who catch on to that or instinctively know that are really very helpful. So far there has been almost no theoretical recognition of the value of whole brain teaching. And yet the very best teachers, Japanese and foreign, do it. And maybe they don't even know why they do it, except that it works, which it really, really does. So wouldn't it be nice if the ministry could kind of screen people just to see if they could get people who had an inkling of what it means to teach a language to people who don't speak it, and to see if they could get people who have some motivation to teach rather than to come to Japan to go hiking or to go dancing or whatever they do. So I think the system can be changed with greater selection of ALTs, a more careful selection of ALTs, by training of ALTs when they come to Japan, and also by helping Japanese teachers make use of ALTs, because they're hard to talk to at first. And that's it's really a pain when you're too busy to take time to talk. You really wish. So Japanese teachers need some instruction on how to handle the situation.
How much?
How much?
It's not making enough noise. It's okay except for the battery.
Maybe the rest of the room can't hear you, so you need to.
How much can we expect from programs in Japanese high schools where they have only 3 50-minute sessions a week?
I'm sorry to say, that's not enough. 3 50-minute sessions a week just won't do it. There's a minimum level, a warm-up level of activating the language in the brain, using it enough hours of the week so that it's there and available easily, something that the student can easily switch into. And 3 hours a week for most students just won't do it. It would help if it was 50 minutes 5 times a week. It would help if the class hours were longer. Just more use of the language, and particularly more, I'm sorry to keep harping on this, more whole brain use of the language. It's very helpful. Have you had experiences with?
This is my neighborhood, and I just talked to a first-year high school student this afternoon. And of course, he's a very bright young fellow, but we only speak in Japanese. And it's regrettable, but this seems to be the situation. And also a comment, if we go back, what happened, the demise of almost every English language newspaper in the country, the Mainichi, the Asahi, what's happened in the last 20 years, 25 years?
Yeah, there's been a chilling out, and it's because of a completely wrong-headed attitude toward what speaking English is and to what kind of training would lead a person to be able to do it.
Well, I don't really know what to say, but I remember when I first came to Japan, the Japan Times had Max Lerner as a regular columnist, and people actually seem to be eager to test their English. It doesn't happen much anymore.
Yeah, and he was writing real stuff, right? Interesting stuff that you wanted to read, not because you were practicing English, but because you wanted to get the content. Getting the students to that point is the whole battle. If they're digging into it because what is there is what they want, then they will learn. They'll pick up the English as more or less incidentally, as in an immersion program.
I guess my question is somewhat related, similar. I'm technically an AOT, but I'm running an oral English program at a school, and I'm training my teachers, my partner teachers. I have trained teachers in Rambosho 5-year action plan to get junior and high school teachers to teach communicative English style, and I'll be teaching junior high school teachers at Michigaku University, teachers who are going to teach junior high school teachers. And I just can't help wondering how successfully can we be within an English program in the schools, as you're saying we need whole brain learning. Can we do it in isolation when they don't have that actual learning style in their other courses and their other classes?
English is different.
It's okay?
No, English is not like memorizing something for another subject. English is a skill. It's a whole body skill. And it's completely different from other courses. Requires.
But I always get resistance to teaching it.
Of course you do.
The correct way.
Because you don't have a theoretical backup to to demonstrate to them why you're right and they're wrong. But that backup is coming. They're slowly, the people who understand what learning a language really is are beginning to make themselves heard. And the message is that book learning isn't going to do it. Real experience is going to do it. What I would suggest is that in every class, pretend that the textbooks will not arrive until 3/4 of the class is finished. And then, if there's no textbook, then what will you and the students do? You're left on each other's mercy. You just about have to talk. And the students should be interested in the content and should be able to do that. Actually, what I'm doing is quoting from Paul Nation, the New Zealand professor who wrote a very influential article called The Four Strands Theory. Imagine a braid of 4 strands. And Nation said that only one of those strands should be left brain technical knowledge like grammar and vocabulary and spelling. The things that are textbooks, if we surrender to them, our textbooks require us to do that almost 100%. So try to use that only. Does it work?
I'm trying, but as I said, I get this resistance from the difference in other classes. They
Right.
can't have a debate or a discussion. It's difficult in this class when they don't know how to conduct it in their own language, for example. Or a conversation about their preferences or their feelings or their opinions, if they don't do it in their own language.
Yeah. What can we recommend? Do you have time to wait for the results to show up? That where it becomes clear that your classes are unaccountably sprinting ahead? If you can hold out long enough for that to happen, it would be good. I don't know, maybe somebody else in the audience has an answer to that. What does a teacher who knows what she's doing do in the face of enormous and uncomprehending resistance from other teachers?
Professor Childs.
I'm a student here at Temple University. My name is Walter Aulos. I'm an undergrad student on my 2nd year now. Almost on my 3rd year according to credits. I took Linguistics 101, Dr. Rosenkirch's linguistics course, Language and Society. And one of the first pages of the book summarized this magical rhetoric or theory that you keep on mentioning in one paragraph, and it made perfect sense. That language is learned through mostly right side of the brain. And of course, the book is great, and it showed Wernicke's area of the brain and the right side and the left side. I mean, the book described everything, but the beginning summarized everything in one paragraph. I really don't see this magical rhetoric or theory. I guess there is no PhD that's yet written in the book about it, but I'm sure we can all be cooperative enough to open up a book and read one paragraph and pass it around. Or as a matter of fact, start a class reading the one paragraph to the students so they understand like we say in the military commander's intent of what needs to happen, and everybody will be on the same page. I understand it's not that easy, especially here, sociocultural, or like you said, socioeconomical elements are against us. I teach English out in town part-time. It's an English cafe. It's 6 people to a table. It works great because Japanese people can be themselves. We're all like you said, untrained, unskilled teachers, but it works perfectly in that relaxed setting. I think there's a lot of hope for the future with that evidence. That's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I think that, well, it's real objects, something that 150 years ago people called the objective method, meaning real objects. It's not rocket science. It's simply start with things that they clearly know and use different words.
This is a red pocketbook. Everybody, red pocketbook. Okay. These are black glasses. Okay. What is this? Red pocketbook. Okay. And what are these? Black glasses. Okay. Now, that's a whole lot of language. That's a whole lot of grammar. And it slips in without a fuss. And it doesn't need a whole lot of theory for you to figure out that is effective, the objective method. Go around and wield objects. Here's an object. Here's a pet bottle. Got tea in it. The tea is warm. Things like that. You can get the students talking, conversing, answering questions, and before they know it, they're actually using English pronunciation and using the basic grammar of English, all without self-consciousness. Yes.
So what's the problem again? Why can't we just do it that way? Is it more of a cultural resistance or politics preventing that from happening?
No, it's a problem that sociologists would call the sociology of knowledge. People think they know that learning English is a highly intellectual endeavor, one of memorization and one that requires thousands of hours. And they think they know that so thoroughly that if you try to tell them that's not true, they just don't believe you. Like trying to tell somebody to jump out of a burning building into the safety net. They just don't want to let go. And if people think they know something, and clearly Japanese people think they know what learning a language is, they're not interested in your different theories of what it is. Just not interested. They already know that. So that's the resistance that we have to slowly work upstream against.
Hi, I'm just curious whether one of the reasons that I think the Japanese people have a hard time learning English is because English is not their second language, but a foreign language. In other words, they don't need to speak English while they are living in Japan. I taught English in high school, and then I got a lot of questions from the students. They say, why do we need to learn English? I'm not going to go abroad, so I don't need to learn English. So I think the discussion has to be why Japanese people can't learn English as a foreign language as opposed to second language. Like I actually learned English from junior high, high school, university in a very traditional way, and I hated English. I didn't like English.
Of course.
I thought it was the most boring subject.
No.
And it was only after I went to the United States and I got the master's in teaching English as a second language, teaching English to the speakers of other languages. And then it made sense that I was learning English as a foreign language and not as a second language. I didn't need to master the language to do well in Japan, as long as I did well on tests.
Right.
So I'm just curious whether this necessity issue is one of the big factors that a lot of Japanese students just don't learn English.
Was there a moment of understanding, a moment of realization when you suddenly figured out about English as a second language and English as a foreign language? You've figured out that the ESL approach was effective? Did that creep up on you slowly?
I thought it was a theories and teaching methodology that I learned in the United States. I think I could probably apply some here in Japan, but not all of them, because of, as one of the people in this room mentioned, that there is it's completely different culture. And like, if you want to do discussion or debate or teach critical thinking, we don't have that. Or we didn't learn it.
We don't think critically around here.
It's really a very difficult concept to learn in this harmonious society. It was only after I was trained in the United States, after a lot of discussions with professors, and I suddenly understood, okay, it's very difficult to teach English in the way that I was taught in the United States.
Yeah, it's difficult but not impossible, and it's practically the only way to succeed. This distinction of ESL and EFL is often presented as an excuse. It's the excuse why Japanese people can't learn English and why English can't be taught in Japan. It's not true. English as a foreign language, that phrase always implies that it's not all around us. It doesn't assault our ears when we turn on the TV. It's not written on all of the advertisements we see. It assumes a condition that is not true. And so I think that the method of teaching English should be ESL in Japan, that is, English as a second language, adding power to the students' linguistic ability. And it should be that from the very beginning. Vivian Cook has a concept of multi-competence. And what he means by that is you don't have to be skillful in a second language. You just have to have some of it in order to work together. There's a synergistic effect with your first language, and you become more powerful by using the two of them together. And my metaphor about that is Musashi, the famous Japanese swordsman. Musashi fought with two swords, a long one in his right hand and a short one in his left hand. Now, what he did not do is fight with one sword sometimes and the other sword sometimes. What he did was fight with them both at the same time. So he was much more powerful by having the twin weapons at his disposal, by overpowering opponents by his superior breadth of resources. And Cook means that by his term multi-competence. So the idea is that however much you know of English, in addition to Japanese, should not be as an alternative to speaking Japanese, but should make you more powerful in your Japanese role. That would be the best situation. Again, that is a ESL, English as a second language approach, rather than EFL, English as a foreign language.
Thanks. We'll have time for one last question.
I said, I've been here for 50 years, and it's been about 40 years since I've looked at a junior high school English language Japanese textbook. The last time I looked at each sentence was explained under the English in katakana. Is that still done?
I'm sorry to say yes.
Well, you were asking questions of what could be done to solve the problem. Getting rid of the katakana explanation in English should have been done a half a century ago.
And when we've done that, the next radical move is to get rid of written language at all, and to teach students through their ears, as the human race has been learning languages for 98,000 out of the last 100,000 years.
One other problem that the Japanese may have in particular is because of the kanji and the different ways of reading it. In 1965, I interviewed the head of the Nihongo Shingikai, the emperor of Japanese, the man who set the rules for the language. His name was Obama, and his first name was either Ritoku or Toshie. On one side, he has his family name and first name. On the other side, in English, it says Obama Ritoku in parentheses and Toshie, and also in English. And I asked him, which is it? And he answers, dochira demo in this. A language that has no rules.
You can use a mic.
A language that has no rules. Even today, I have trouble deciding when to use wa and when to use ga. Nobody's ever explained that to me, and I've been speaking the language for 50 years. I still don't know what I'm writing about.
If I may interject something, Sam, it makes me so happy to hear this from you, because I have this problem too, so I think it was been done. Since you are one of the top language Japanese speakers among the foreigners, I realize that I shouldn't feel bad about it. Do you want to conclude, or?
Well, yeah, how to conclude a thing like this. Your ideas have been very interesting, and your questions and the puzzlers that you've presented are real and serious, and one doesn't have all the answers. I certainly don't. And what I've presented to you is a viewpoint that I've gradually gained in my position of interacting with Japanese teachers of English, and I expect further improvement as the years go on, and I thank my students for what they've done. So please don't take today's lecture as the final answer of anything, perhaps as the raising of some issues. Thank you very much.